If you've ever sacrificed everything for your family and still been told you're not wanted, then listen close. Because on the night of my daughter-in-law's birthday, I learned the true cost of loving someone who only sees you as an obstacle. Before I reveal how my life changed forever, make sure you subscribe, leave a comment if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted, and share this video to help others who need to hear the truth. I remember the exact moment my world cracked open. The candlelit kitchen was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own heart beating out of rhythm. My hands shook as I smoothed the edges of the cake I'd spent all afternoon baking, a chocolate hazelnut recipe I'd learned from my mother, one I hoped would show Emily, my daughter-in-law, that despite everything, I was still trying. The cake looked almost perfect. My son, Ben, had always loved when I baked from scratch, but tonight, none of this was really for him. Tonight, it was about Emily, her 32nd birthday, her friends, her world. Through the sliding glass door, laughter drifted in from the backyard. I saw the soft glow of fairy lights strung up over the patio, the fire pit crackling, the little group gathered around my son and his wife. Emily, in a pale blue sundress, was at the center of it all, tossing her head back as someone made a joke I couldn't quite hear. Ben stood just behind her, his arms slung around her waist, his face split in a smile that used to be reserved for me. My throat tightened. I hesitated on the threshold. I didn't want to interrupt, but I wanted her to know I cared. Maybe, just maybe, this small gesture could close the gap that had grown between us over the past 3 years. I took a deep breath, balancing the cake in my hands and pushing open the door. No one noticed me at first. I hovered, invisible, at the edge of my own backyard. Emily's best friend, Kelsey, was mid-story, her voice bright and loud. I waited for a pause, for a moment to step in, but the conversation flowed on without me. Then I heard it. The words I'll never forget. I just wish she'd stop trying so hard, Emily sighed, not bothering to lower her voice. It's exhausting. I married Ben, not his mother. Sometimes I feel like she's just waiting for me to mess up so she can swoop in and fix everything. Laughter bubbled around the table, but it stung like acid. Ben said nothing, just sipped his beer and looked away. Kelsey leaned in, her tone conspiratorial. But at least she bakes, she teased. You could do worse. Emily rolled her eyes. Yeah, well, sometimes I wish she'd just disappear. Like, is that awful? Another round of laughter. I froze in place, cake trembling in my grip. My entire life, all those sleepless nights, all those meals, all those years spent putting everyone ahead of myself, reduced to a punchline at my own daughter-in-law's party. The ache was physical. I wanted to drop the cake, to turn and run back inside, but my feet wouldn't move. I stood there, caught in the glare of their laughter, every word a blade. Ben still didn't speak. Not once did he defend me, not even with a look. And that hurt more than anything Emily could ever say. I'd lost my son, and now I was losing my home. Something shifted inside me as I watched my family, my only child and the woman who'd taken him from me, carry on as if I was already gone. I felt the urge to scream, to smash the cake, to demand answers, but instead, I did what I'd always done. I swallowed the pain, straightened my shoulders, and smiled. I stepped forward, made my presence known, and sang, "Happy Birthday," as if nothing was wrong. My voice was steady, my smile practiced. Emily blew out the candles. The group clapped. For a moment, I was included. But I knew it was an act, on both sides. After the song, I set the cake on the table, accepted Emily's half-hearted thank you, and slipped back into the shadows of the kitchen, my hands shaking. I could still hear their voices through the window, softer now but no less cruel. "She's just so desperate," Emily whispered. "Ben, you have to do something." I heard him sigh. "I know, Em. I'll talk to her. She'll get the message." The world spun. My knees buckled, and I gripped the counter for balance. That night, as the party wore on, I stood in the dark hallway and listened to the sounds of my own exile. Plates clattering. Bottles opening. Laughter that no longer belonged to me. My heart was broken, yes, but something else flickered in the ashes of my grief. Something cold. Something sharp. If Emily wanted me out of her life, if Ben was willing to let her erase me, then maybe it was time I gave them exactly what they wished for, but not in the way they expected. If you've ever felt invisible in your own home, if you've ever wondered how much pain a mother's heart can take, then keep watching. Because what happened next changed everything, and it's a story you'll want to see through to the very end. I spent the rest of that night sitting alone at the kitchen table, surrounded by the mess of the party I'd hosted but wasn't welcome at. Empty plates, half-melted candles, wine stains on the linen I'd chosen for Emily's favorite color. It struck me how invisible a mother could become in the very home she helped build, how quickly all those years of love could dissolve into the background noise of someone else's happiness. I pressed my palms flat against the wood grain, trying to remember a time when Ben would have defended me. It seemed so long ago. When he was small, he used to run to me after every scraped knee, every disappointment, every birthday that didn't go as planned. Now he was a stranger sitting in my backyard, laughing with the woman who'd made me an outsider in my own life. As the clock ticked past midnight, the house finally grew quiet. I waited until the last guest stumbled out, the last car engine faded into the night. Only then did I rise from the table, my bones aching with exhaustion and something colder, resentment. I began to clear away the remains of the party, each plate and glass feeling heavier than the last. The silence was suffocating. I couldn't even cry, my grief was too deep for tears. When I opened the dishwasher, I found a half-empty wine glass sitting on the top rack, lipstick smudged in a color I'd never wear. Emily's signature shade. For a moment, I imagined smashing it, letting the shards scatter as a symbol of everything that was broken between us. Instead, I set it gently inside, closed the door, and tried to breathe. Upstairs, I heard muffled voices, Ben and Emily talking in their bedroom. I caught fragments through the floorboards. She just doesn't get it, Ben. She's always around. It's too much. His reply was softer, but I caught the words, I know, and I'll handle it. That was it. No defense. No loyalty. Just resignation. Something hardened in me then, a layer of self-preservation I hadn't needed before. I realized I'd been clinging to the fantasy that if I just tried a little harder, smiled a little wider, baked a few more cakes, I could win them back. But you can't force someone to love you, not even your own son. And you certainly can't compete with the version of yourself your daughter-in-law has decided to hate. The next morning, I woke to the sound of footsteps overhead. Ben left early for work, he didn't say goodbye. Emily moved around the house like a ghost, gathering laundry, making calls, never looking me in the eye. When she finally did speak, it was only to ask if I could keep it down, in the kitchen. She had a Zoom meeting. I nodded, biting my tongue so hard I tasted blood. It was my house, but somehow, I was the one expected to tiptoe. That afternoon, as I folded towels in the laundry room, I heard Emily on the phone with her mother. It's getting worse, she complained, her voice sharp and clipped. She's everywhere, always meddling. I wish Ben would just tell her to move out already. We need our own space. Her mother's voice, muffled but unmistakably smug, replied, You have to set boundaries, sweetheart. She's never going to leave unless you make it clear. I stood frozen, a towel clenched in my hands. There it was, spoken out loud. They wanted me gone. Not just Emily, but her mother too. The realization was both humiliating and clarifying. I had outstayed my welcome. Every kindness, every sacrifice, every sleepless night spent worrying about Ben's happiness, they didn't matter anymore. I was a problem to be solved, not a person to be loved. But there's a strange freedom in hitting rock bottom. When you have nothing left to lose, you can finally see the truth for what it is. I looked around the laundry room, at the photographs taped to the walls, Ben's graduation, his first apartment, even his wedding to Emily. I saw, for the first time, the distance in his eyes, the forced smile when I hugged him too tight. I realized I'd been holding on to memories, not reality. I put the towels away, straightened the pictures, and walked out to the garden. The roses I'd planted years ago were in full bloom, pink and yellow and defiant. I knelt beside them, running my fingers through the dirt, grounding myself in the simple truth that life goes on, with or without gratitude. The sun was warm on my back. I closed my eyes and let myself grieve for the life I'd imagined, the family I thought I still had. That evening, Ben and Emily came home together, laughing about something I couldn't quite hear. For a moment, I watched them through the window, their heads close together, moving in perfect unison. I wondered if Ben even noticed how much his wife's moods controlled the weather of our home now, or if he cared. They passed me in the hallway without a word, retreating upstairs, leaving me in the echo of their laughter. As I set the table for dinner, 3 plates, out of habit, I realized I'd become a ghost in my own story. But ghosts have power too. We can haunt the living. Or, if we choose, we can disappear completely and leave the living to face their own shadows. That night, as I lay awake in the dark, I decided, if Emily wanted me out, if Ben wouldn't stop her, I would vanish from their lives, but on my own terms. If you've ever wondered how it feels to let go, to reclaim your dignity in the face of betrayal, stay with me. Because this isn't the end, it's just the beginning. The next day, I woke up with a strange sense of purpose humming beneath the ache in my chest. The pain of being unwanted hadn't faded, but it had crystallized into something sharper, a kind of quiet determination. For the first time in months, I didn't start my morning waiting for Ben or Emily to greet me. Instead, I took my coffee out to the garden and listened to the robins, their song a reminder that there was a world outside these walls that didn't know my heartbreak. I spent the morning sorting through boxes in the garage, something I'd been meaning to do for years but never had the time or will. There, among old holiday decorations and forgotten children's toys, I found the baby blanket I'd crocheted for Ben when he was born. The pale blue yarn was worn soft by decades, and for a moment, I let myself remember the tiny boy who once clung to me with all the love in his heart. I wondered where that boy had gone and what I'd done to lose him. The grief was still there, but this time, I didn't run from it. I folded the blanket and set it aside, not as a keepsake, but as a marker of a life I was ready to leave behind. Later that afternoon, as I was organizing a box of old photographs, Emily breezed into the garage, her phone pressed to her ear. She didn't see me at first. "Yes, Mom, I know," she said, rolling her eyes. "She's in her own little world lately. Honestly, I think she's finally getting the hint." She laughed, a high, brittle sound that grated on my nerves. I held my breath, waiting for her to notice me. When she did, she offered a tight, practiced smile and muttered, "Don't mind me, just looking for the extension cord." I handed her the cord in silence. She took it without thanks and hurried out, her voice already back on the line, telling her mother how exhausting it was to have me underfoot all the time. It was like I wasn't even a person, just an inconvenience to be managed. I stood in the garage, the walls closing in, and realized that I was done trying to fit into a space that was shrinking around me. That night, I sat in my room with the door closed and started making a list. Not a to-do list for the house or a shopping list for the week, but a real, honest inventory of my life. I wrote down everything I'd done for Ben over the years, the birthday parties, the late-night talks, the college tuition I'd worked overtime to pay, the wedding I'd helped plan and pay for, every time I'd put his happiness before my own. And then, in a second column, I wrote down all the ways I'd been pushed aside since Emily entered our lives. The subtle digs, the cold shoulders, the endless small rejections that, over time, had eroded my sense of belonging until there was nothing left. Looking at the two lists side by side, I felt a wave of sadness, but also a sense of relief. For so long, I'd blamed myself for the distance between us. But the truth was, you can't force someone to appreciate what they refuse to see. It was never about not doing enough, it was about never being enough for someone determined to keep you on the outside. After midnight, I wandered downstairs, unable to sleep. The house was dark and quiet except for the glow of the television in the living room. I found Ben alone on the couch, a beer in his hand, his eyes fixed on the screen but unfocused. He didn't notice me at first. I stood in the doorway, my heart pounding, knowing this might be the last time we'd ever speak as mother and son. "Ben," I said softly. He jumped, startled. "Sorry, Mom, didn't see you there." I hesitated, searching his face for some sign of the boy I remembered. "Do you have a minute?" He nodded, but his body language was guarded, closed off. I took a seat on the opposite end of the couch. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I heard the refrigerator kick on in the kitchen, the distant tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. "Ben," I began, "do you ever think about how things used to be? When it was just you and me?" He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was tired. "Things change, Mom. People grow up. You have to let go sometime." It was a knife to the heart, but I forced myself to keep my composure. "Letting go doesn't mean disappearing," I said quietly. "It means loving from a distance. But I need to know, do you really want me gone?" He looked at me then, really looked, and for a second, I saw the guilt flicker in his eyes. "It's not about wanting you gone," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's just, Emily needs space. We need to figure things out without feeling like we're being watched." My hands clenched in my lap. "I've tried so hard to make her feel welcome. To make you both happy. Have I really failed so badly?" Ben shook his head, but he didn't deny it. "You haven't failed, Mom. You don't know when to let go." I sat there for a long moment, letting his words settle. It was as close to an answer as I was going to get. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and looked at him one last time. "I hear you, Ben," I said softly. "I really do." That night, as I crawled into bed, I felt a strange lightness. I was grieving, yes, but for the first time, I also felt free. Free to make choices for myself. Free to start writing a new story, even if it meant closing the door on the old one. If you've ever found the courage to walk away, to reclaim your self-worth after a lifetime of giving, you'll understand what comes next. Because the hardest part of love isn't letting go, it's choosing yourself when no one else will. The morning after that late-night conversation with Ben, I awoke before sunrise, a sense of finality heavy in my chest. I sat on the edge of my bed, letting the silence settle around me, and tried to remember when I last felt truly at home in this house. Maybe it was years ago, before boundaries were blurred and roles reversed, when my opinion still mattered and my presence was welcome. As the sun crept through the curtains, I made a decision. No more waiting for someone else to save me. I would save myself. It wasn't about revenge or pride, it was about survival, about reclaiming the dignity I'd lost piece by piece in 1,000 small humiliations. My days of living as a guest in my own home were over. With a clarity I hadn't felt in years, I dressed, made a cup of tea, and sat at the kitchen table with a notepad. I started making lists, real lists this time, practical ones. First, the bills. The mortgage was in my name, the utilities drawn from my account. I tallied up the numbers, every payment, every expense, every hidden cost of keeping this house running smoothly while Ben and Emily lived as if the world simply provided for them. Next, the value of the house. I knew our neighborhood was sought after, nice schools, a tree-lined street, just enough distance from the city to feel peaceful. I looked up real estate listings, jotting down prices, imagining the lives of the families who might one day live here and actually appreciate what they had. A sense of calm washed over me as I realized the power I still held. I was not powerless, not really. I had choices, more choices than either of them wanted to admit. My heart pounded with a nervous kind of excitement as I realized I didn't have to beg for respect. I could demand it, or I could take it with me when I left. Later that morning, Emily came into the kitchen, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, her expression already pinched from whatever minor inconvenience the day had brought her. She poured herself coffee, barely glancing my way. "Are you using the car today?" she asked, not even bothering to say good morning. I shook my head. "No, go ahead." She hesitated, fingers drumming on the countertop. "Ben and I were thinking, maybe we could have a little privacy tonight. You know, just us for dinner." Her words landed with the weight of an eviction notice. I smiled, a practiced smile, and nodded. "Of course. I'll make myself scarce." After she left, I sat there for a long time, staring at the fading flowers in the vase on the table, thinking about all the times I'd bend over backward to give them what they wanted. I realized, with a shock of clarity, that it would never be enough. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how many sacrifices I made, there would always be a new request, a new way to shrink my world until it was small enough not to bother them. That afternoon, I called my old friend Margaret. We hadn't spoken in months, not since she moved to Oregon to be closer to her grandchildren. When she answered, her voice was warm and full of surprise. "Linda. My goodness, it's been ages. Is everything all right?" For a moment, I couldn't speak, just hearing someone say my name with kindness nearly undid me. I swallowed hard and managed a shaky laugh. "I just needed to hear a friendly voice," I admitted. "I'm thinking of making some changes." Margaret didn't pry, didn't judge. She listened as I poured out my story, the distance with Ben, the hostility from Emily, the loneliness that had taken root in every corner of my life. "You've given them enough, Linda," she said gently. "You deserve to be somewhere you're wanted." Her words, so simple and true, hit me harder than any insult Emily had ever thrown my way. We talked for nearly an hour, sharing stories, remembering better days. By the end of the call, something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just grieving what I'd lost, I was starting to imagine what I might still have, if only I was brave enough to reach for it. That evening, while Ben and Emily enjoyed their private dinner, I packed a small overnight bag and checked into a modest motel across town. The room was nothing special, just a standard double bed, a faded floral comforter, and a view of the parking lot, but it felt like freedom. For the first time in years, I had space that was truly mine. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, letting the quiet seep into my bones. I listened to the hum of traffic outside, the distant murmur of a television in the next room, and I felt a strange kind of peace. I spent that night thinking, really thinking, about what I wanted. Not what Ben or Emily expected of me, not what I'd convinced myself I had to do out of duty or guilt, but what I truly needed to feel alive again. The answer surprised me with its simplicity. I wanted to matter. I wanted to be somewhere I was seen, valued, and loved, not for what I could give, but for who I was. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I would no longer beg for scraps of affection or approval. I would build a new life, even if I had to do it alone. And if Ben and Emily wanted a world without me, I would give them exactly that, but not before showing them just how much they'd taken for granted. If you've ever stood on the edge of a decision that could change everything, if you've ever wondered what it would feel like to choose yourself, keep watching. Because the next step I took would set everything in motion. Returning home from the motel the next morning, I felt different. I walked through the front door not as a ghost, but as a woman who finally remembered her own worth. The house was quiet, sun streaming through the living room windows, and for a moment it almost felt like it used to, peaceful, hopeful, full of possibility. But the illusion lasted only seconds. On the entryway table sat a note in Emily's handwriting, Linda, please remember to knock before coming into our bedroom. Privacy matters. No greeting, no warmth, just another reminder of the shrinking space I was allowed to occupy. I set my bag down, letting the anger roll through me like a summer storm. For so long, I tried to keep the peace, to be accommodating, to take up as little space as possible in my own home. But now, every polite request, every little hint, just confirmed what I'd finally accepted. My presence was unwanted, and my absence was overdue. Instead of shrinking, I stood taller. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, letting my mind settle into problem-solving mode. For years I'd managed every aspect of this household: budgets, repairs, schedules, insurance. If anyone knew the value of this life, it was me. I opened my laptop and began gathering the facts: bank statements, mortgage balance, the current market value of our home. As I ran the numbers, a sense of power filled me, steady and sure. I realized that for all their talk of independence and privacy, Ben and Emily had built their comfort on the foundation I provided. Late that morning, Ben came home for lunch, surprised to see me at the table with piles of paperwork. "Mom, what's all this?" he asked, glancing uneasily at the spreadsheets and the folders I'd spread out. I met his gaze calmly. "Just getting organized. After all, I handle all the bills, right?" He frowned, as if the idea of me doing something for myself was inconvenient. "You know, Emily's been saying it's probably time we started paying our own way. She thinks it would help set boundaries." I laughed, a dry, tired sound. "I think that's a wonderful idea. Maybe it's time everyone took responsibility for their own comfort." The conversation ended quickly after that. Ben seemed uncomfortable, shifting in his chair, but he didn't protest. I could see it in his eyes, though, a flicker of worry. For the first time, he sensed the ground shifting beneath his feet. That afternoon, I made a call to a real estate agent, a woman named Susan whom I'd met years ago at a neighborhood fundraiser. Her voice was warm, direct, and professional. "You want to talk options, Linda?" she asked. "Let's sit down and make a plan. Houses like yours don't last long in this market." I arranged to meet her the next day, a sense of anticipation replacing the ache that had lived in my chest for so long. That evening, as I walked through the house, I looked at everything with fresh eyes. The dining table scarred by years of family dinners and holidays. The dent in the wall where Ben, as a teenager, had thrown a football inside despite my warnings. The window seat where I used to read to him on rainy afternoons, both of us curled up together, safe and warm. I let myself mourn for those days, for the small rituals that once bound us together. But I didn't let nostalgia weaken my resolve. Those memories would always be mine, no matter where I went. Emily passed me in the hallway, barely looking up from her phone. She didn't notice the box of keepsakes I'd placed by the door, or the careful way I'd begun packing away pieces of my own story. She was too busy texting, planning, living in a world that had no space for me. For the first time, that realization didn't sting, it just clarified the path ahead. That night, I sat in bed with a notepad, making lists of everything I would need to do. Notify the utilities. Gather paperwork. Research moving companies. Call Margaret in Oregon, just to ask what it was really like to start over. Every task was a step closer to freedom. As I drifted off to sleep, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of being alone, not of starting over, not even of losing Ben. I'd already lost him, in a way. But I hadn't lost myself, not completely, not yet. If you've ever stood at the crossroads of heartbreak and hope, you know this moment, when the pain finally gives way to possibility, when the life you thought you'd lost reveals itself as a new beginning. What happened next would prove just how much strength I had left, and just how much Ben and Emily had taken for granted. The next morning arrived with a crispness in the air that felt almost symbolic. I dressed in my best blouse and slacks, not because I had anywhere special to go, but because I needed to feel put together, strong, and intentional. As I waited for Susan, the real estate agent, I straightened the living room, running my hand over the mantel where family photos used to sit. Most of them were packed away now, tucked into a box labeled Memories, Keep. Susan arrived precisely at 10. She stepped inside with a confidence that filled the room, greeting me with a firm handshake and a warm, sympathetic smile. "Linda, it's good to see you. I'll be honest, when you called, I sensed there was a story behind it." I laughed, a little embarrassed. "That obvious, huh?" Susan nodded gently. "You'd be surprised how many women sit across from me, looking for a fresh start." We walked the house together, Susan making notes on her clipboard, snapping photos, asking questions about the upgrades and the age of the roof. The more we talked, the more empowered I felt. I wasn't just planning to leave, I was planning to step into something new. As we sat down at the kitchen table, she pulled out market data and showed me recent sales in the neighborhood. "You've kept this place in wonderful shape, Linda. I wouldn't be surprised if you got more than you expect." For a moment, I let myself imagine it, selling the house, settling my affairs, maybe moving somewhere near Margaret. A little apartment with sunlight, new neighbors, and space just for me. Susan looked up from her paperwork, her voice gentle. "You know, starting over isn't failure. Sometimes it's the bravest thing a person can do." I blinked away the prick of tears. "I just want to matter again," I confessed. "To be seen." She squeezed my hand in solidarity. "You will. I promise." After Susan left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long while, tracing circles in the wood grain. I thought about the woman I'd become in this house, how she'd spent so much time trying to be useful, agreeable, quiet. How many times had I told myself my needs were less important than everyone else's comfort? I decided, right then, that I would never apologize for taking up space again. That afternoon, I began quietly packing my belongings. Not everything, just the things that meant something to me. My wedding china, a faded stack of letters from my own mother, a battered recipe book with my notes scribbled in the margins. Each object I packed was a small declaration: I am not disposable. I am not invisible. As I boxed up my life, I heard Ben and Emily arguing upstairs. Their voices drifted down the hall, tense and sharp. "She's acting so strange," Emily complained. "It's making me nervous. What if she's planning something?" Ben's reply was muffled, but I heard the anxiety in his tone. "Let her be, Em. Maybe she's finally getting the message." I smiled, just a little. If only they knew. That evening, as I watered my roses for what might be the last time, I allowed myself to remember all the beginnings this house had given me. The day I brought Ben home from the hospital, the first Christmas after my husband passed, the spring I learned how to fix a leaky faucet by watching YouTube videos and refusing to wait for help. Each of those moments felt like a quiet victory. Now, it was time for one final act of courage. Ben found me in the garden, hands deep in the soil. "Mom," he said, awkward and uncertain, "is everything all right?" I wiped my hands on my jeans, looking up at him in the golden light. "Everything's fine, Ben. Just taking care of things. It's what I've always done, isn't it?" He shifted, uncomfortable, and I saw the confusion flicker across his face. For a brief moment, I wondered if he was finally seeing me as more than a burden. But the moment passed, and he headed back inside. That night, I called Margaret again. I told her about the realtor, about packing, about how scared and excited I felt. She listened, offering the kind of unconditional support I hadn't realized I'd been missing for so long. "You're doing the right thing, Linda. It's never too late to put yourself first." As I hung up, I looked around my bedroom, now half empty, and felt a rush of anticipation. The house was still filled with memories, but now they were mine to carry forward, not chains to keep me stuck. I was finally doing what I should have done years ago, choosing myself. If you've ever dared to take the first step toward a new life, you know the exhilaration that follows fear. The next days would test my courage in ways I couldn't imagine, but I was ready. Because sometimes the only way to be seen is to leave, and let the people who took you for granted discover what absence truly means. The days that followed moved quickly, filled with an odd mix of anxiety and hope that clung to me from morning until night. With every box I packed and every drawer I emptied, I felt the weight of the past begin to loosen its grip. The real estate paperwork was moving fast. Susan had put together a dazzling listing and already scheduled an open house for the weekend. Every phone call, every document signed, felt like a brick laid in the foundation of the new life I was determined to build. I worked quietly, not wanting Ben or Emily to know just how far along I'd come. It wasn't secrecy for the sake of drama, it was protection. I knew that if they realized what I was doing, they would try to stop me, or worse, guilt me into staying just long enough for the resentment to fester all over again. I wasn't leaving out of spite, but out of necessity. I needed them to see the reality of what life would be like without me propping up the comforts they took for granted. One afternoon, as I was sorting through an old jewelry box, I found the locket Ben had given me for Mother's Day when he was 8. The paint was chipped and the clasp a little loose, but inside was a picture of him, toothy grin and wild hair, with, "I love you, Mom," scrawled in shaky handwriting. I closed my eyes and let myself feel the ache of longing for that little boy, for the years before distance and pride and marriage had come between us. Carefully, I tucked the locket into my purse, a reminder that love doesn't disappear, even when it's pushed aside. Friday evening brought a sudden storm, rain lashing at the windows and thunder rumbling overhead. I watched the water trace rivers down the glass, thinking of how many storms this house had weathered, Ben's childhood fevers, the nights my husband never came home, the fights that ended in slammed doors and tearful apologies. Now, as the sky cracked open, it felt almost like a cleansing, a chance for the world to start fresh. Emily barely spoke to me that day, only offering a curt, "Don't forget to lock up if you go out." She had no idea that soon, I would be locking up for the last time. I wondered what she would say if she knew, if she'd feel anything other than relief. Maybe one day, she'd look back and see me not as a rival or a nuisance, but as a person with her own bruises and dreams. But that was for her to reckon with, not me. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear. Susan arrived early, arms full of fresh flowers and air freshener, her eyes sparkling with purpose. "Today's the day, Linda. Let's show them what this place can be." I helped her arrange sunflowers on the table, plump pillows on the sofa, and the whole house smelled like hope and possibility. The doorbell rang just after 10, potential buyers, couples with bright eyes and big dreams, families with small children running through the halls, their laughter echoing like a memory of my own son. I watched them move through the house, their excitement palpable. Strangely, I didn't feel sadness, I felt relief. I could see my home through their eyes, full of warmth and potential, not as the backdrop for my loneliness. One woman paused by the roses in the backyard, inhaling deeply. "You must have spent years tending these," she said. I nodded, smiling. They were my sanctuary. She understood, her eyes softened with empathy. By the end of the open house, Susan was beaming. "We've already had 3 serious offers, Linda. I told you, homes like yours don't last." I felt a thrill of pride, one final victory, a sign that I hadn't poured myself into these walls for nothing. That night, I sat in the living room with a mug of tea, staring at the boxes stacked neatly along the wall. The rain was gone, and moonlight poured through the windows. I realized I wasn't waiting for anyone to rescue me anymore. I was my own rescue. Ben came home late, smelling of beer and fried food. He looked surprised to see me awake. "Mom, what's going on with all the boxes?" he asked, eyes narrowing. For the first time in years, I met his gaze without apology. "I'm moving, Ben. The house is going on the market. I need a fresh start." He was silent, trying to process what this meant. You can't just, he began, but I cut him off gently. I can. And I will. I deserve happiness, too. He didn't have an answer. He stood there for a moment, lost, and I almost reached for him, almost tried to smooth things over like I always did. But I stopped myself. This was a lesson he needed to learn, the cost of taking someone's love for granted. If you've ever faced the moment when your truth can no longer be hidden, when you finally claim your freedom, you know how liberating it is. The wheels were in motion now, and there was no turning back. What came next would test all of us in ways none of us could have imagined. The days after I announced my decision were a blur of tension and confrontation. The air inside the house felt electrified, every silence loaded, every conversation sharp and cautious. Ben moved through the rooms in a daze, avoiding my gaze, while Emily grew colder and more brittle with each passing hour. I could almost see the gears turning in her mind as she tried to calculate how this would affect her carefully constructed world. At first, Ben tried to reason with me. Mom, you don't need to do this. Just, take a break, go on a vacation. We can figure this out. But I shook my head, gentle but firm. This isn't about a vacation, Ben. It's about starting over. I need to do this for myself. He stared at me, searching my face for any sign of doubt, but I gave him none. What about us? He asked, the words sounding like a child's plea. For a moment, I felt the ache of old love, but I reminded myself, it was time for him to learn how to stand on his own. Emily's response was different, sharper, more self-preserving. I don't understand why you're acting this way, she said, voice clipped. This is so dramatic, Linda. Couldn't you have at least talked to us first? I met her eyes with a calm I didn't know I possessed. I've tried to talk for years, Emily. I'm done begging to be heard. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her face. As Susan guided me through the final offers on the house, the reality began to set in. The best bid came from a young couple with a toddler and another baby on the way. Their letter spoke of dreams, of building a family, of creating memories within these walls. It brought tears to my eyes, tears of relief, not regret. I realized that I was passing this house, and all the love I'd poured into it, to someone who could appreciate it anew. The night before the sale closed, Ben cornered me in the kitchen. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hands shaking. Is this really what you want, Mom? There was desperation in his voice, the final crumbling of the walls he'd built around himself. Why now? Why like this? I took his hands in mine, the way I used to when he was small. Because I'm worth more than being ignored. Because I want to live before it's too late. He dropped his gaze, his shoulders collapsing in defeat. Emily says we'll be fine, that maybe this is what we needed. But, what if I don't want you to go? His vulnerability almost undid me, but I knew better now than to offer comfort for a pain he'd helped cause. You'll survive, Ben. You're stronger than you think. And maybe, when you've had time to sit with this, you'll realize what you've lost. Emily, on the other hand, grew angrier as moving day approached. She slammed doors, muttered complaints under her breath, and spent hours on the phone with her mother, plotting their next steps. I let her stew. I'd spent too many years trying to soothe her anxiety, accommodate her wishes, shrink myself to fit inside her narrative. Now, I let her feel the discomfort of change. The last week in the house was a study in contrasts. The young couple who'd bought the place came by to measure windows, full of energy and gratitude. I showed them where the roses bloomed best, shared the little secrets that made this home feel alive. They thanked me over and over, their kindness like balm on old wounds. Meanwhile, Ben and Emily struggled to accept the loss of their safety net. I saw the worry in Ben's face as he made calls to banks, asked about short-term rentals, wondered aloud how they would afford a place on their own. For the first time, I didn't step in to help. I let them face the consequences of their entitlement. On the last night, I walked through each room in silence, touching the doorframes, whispering goodbye to the life I'd built here. In the hallway, I paused by the family photo from years ago, Ben, small and bright-eyed, my late husband's arm around us both. I smiled through tears, knowing I had loved them fiercely and well. Packing my car with the last of my things, I felt the full weight of freedom settle around my shoulders. The driveway was empty, the sky washed with the colors of dusk. Ben came out one final time, uncertainty in his voice. "Call me, okay?" he said. I hugged him tight, feeling the tremor in his arms. "I will. And I hope, one day, you'll understand why I had to do this." As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced back just once, catching sight of Emily standing in the doorway, arms crossed, her face unreadable. I drove off into the deepening night, my heart pounding with fear and exhilaration. For the first time in decades, my life was truly my own. If you've ever stepped into the unknown, knowing that the only way forward is through the pain, then you know what courage really is. I was finally ready to live, even if it meant starting from scratch. What waited for me on the other side was a future I had to discover for myself. My new beginning didn't come with fanfare. It started quietly, in a rented one-bedroom apartment overlooking a row of sycamores on the edge of town. My first night there, I sat on the floor, surrounded by cardboard boxes, and listened to the unfamiliar hush. No voices upstairs. No footsteps in the hallway. No one to ask where I was going or why I'd come home late. For the first time in years, the silence was mine, and it was both terrifying and beautiful. I unpacked the bare necessities first: a kettle for tea, a faded quilt, the locket Ben had given me, a stack of books I'd meant to read for years but never found the time. As I arranged them on new shelves, I realized how much of my identity had been tangled up in other people's needs. Now, each choice was my own, from the color of the curtains to the sound of the music I played while making dinner. There was freedom in that, even as I felt the sharp edges of loneliness press in at the corners. The first week was hardest. Some mornings I woke with a start, thinking I'd overslept and missed making breakfast for Ben and Emily. It took a while for my body to understand it was allowed to rest. I'd walk through my little kitchen, sunlight spilling across the tile, and feel both lost and weightless, like I'd stepped off a cliff, trusting something invisible to catch me. Margaret called every day, her cheerful voice a lifeline. She sent photos of her garden in Oregon, invited me out for long weekends, reminded me I was not alone even when I felt untethered. "Give yourself grace," she urged. "Change is hard, but so are you." I wrote those words on a sticky note and stuck it to the bathroom mirror. I read them every morning, even on the days I didn't believe them. Small rituals helped. I took long walks through my new neighborhood, nodding at strangers, learning the rhythm of unfamiliar streets. I signed up for a ceramics class at the local community center, my hands clumsy at first but slowly finding their way. One evening, the woman who ran the class, a widow named Alice with laugh lines and paint under her nails, offered me a ride home in the rain. We sat in her car, sipping coffee from a flask, talking about grief and beginnings and the strange courage it takes to start again. I missed Ben, sometimes with an ache so deep it felt physical. I missed the sound of his laughter in the hallway, the boyish way he'd tease me over burnt toast, even the old arguments that meant we still cared enough to fight. I wondered if he missed me at all, or if Emily's certainty filled up all the empty space I'd left behind. I tried not to dwell on it, tried to let the ache be a sign that I had loved well, even if it was time to love myself more. 2 weeks after moving, I received a letter in Ben's handwriting. I recognized it instantly, slanted, messy, written in blue ink. My hands shook as I opened it, not knowing if it would bring comfort or reopen wounds. His words were brief, but honest. "I don't know how to say this, but I'm sorry. I miss you. I wish things had been different. Emily's struggling. I am too. I hope you're okay. Ben." I pressed the letter to my heart, tears springing to my eyes. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a grand reconciliation. But it was something, a crack in the wall that had separated us. I sat with that feeling, letting both the pain and hope wash over me, not rushing to fix anything, just letting it be. Every day, I made one small promise to myself, to show up for my own life, no matter how hard it felt. I cooked simple meals, watered a pot of basil on my windowsill, called Margaret when the nights felt too long. I even found myself humming sometimes, letting old songs fill the empty spaces. The more I leaned into my own company, the more I discovered a woman I hadn't seen in years, resilient, resourceful, and worthy of joy. One Sunday afternoon, I returned from a walk to find a bouquet of sunflowers on my doorstep, no note attached. I smiled, suspecting Margaret or maybe Alice from ceramics. It was a small kindness, but in that moment, it felt like a promise. The world was still full of beauty, still full of new beginnings. If you've ever rebuilt your life from scratch, you know that healing doesn't happen all at once. Some days, the loneliness still stung. But every morning, I woke up in a home of my own choosing. And that, for now, was enough. By the end of my first month on my own, the ache in my chest had softened, replaced by something gentler, a quiet pride. I was doing it. I was surviving, even on the days I still longed for the past. Each week brought small victories. The first time I fixed a leaky faucet without calling for help, the first time I hosted a neighbor for tea, the first time I laughed so hard I forgot, even for a moment, to miss what I'd left behind. Alice from ceramics became a real friend. We met for coffee on Wednesdays, where she shared stories of her late husband and her grown children who lived far away. Sometimes we sat together in easy silence, hands wrapped around warm mugs, letting the comfort of shared solitude settle between us. One afternoon, she surprised me with a small, wobbly clay bowl. "For your keys," she grinned. A housewarming present from one woman starting over to another. I set it by my front door and felt, for the first time, truly welcome in my own space. At night, I wrote in a journal, capturing each day's small moments, a good meal, a kind word from a stranger, the feel of the sun on my face. The entry started off hesitant, but soon filled pages. Sometimes, as I wrote, I'd think of Ben and Emily, and wonder how they were managing. It was hard not to reach out, not to fix things, but I reminded myself that they had their own lessons to learn. The time for rescuing was over. This was the season of letting go. One morning, a letter from Ben arrived again, this time longer. He apologized for the way things had ended, admitted that life without my support was harder than he'd expected. He shared that Emily had started seeing a counselor, that they were both struggling to find their footing, that the house already felt different without me in it. "I didn't realize how much you did for us," he wrote. "I guess I thought you'd always be there, no matter what. I hope you're finding happiness, Mom. I really do." I reread the letter over and over, tears sliding down my cheeks, not just for the sorrow in his words but for the hope threaded through them. He was learning. He was growing, maybe for the first time without me smoothing the way. It was bittersweet, but it was real. The apartment became a reflection of this new life, plants thriving on the windowsill, a bulletin board crowded with invitations to art shows and local concerts, handmade ceramics stacked on the shelves. My phone filled with new numbers, Margaret's, Alice's, a book club leader named Shirley who'd insisted I join their weekly discussions. I said yes, sometimes even before I felt ready, trusting that courage was something you practiced into being. Sometimes loneliness still crept in, especially on quiet Sunday afternoons, or when a memory flashed sharp and bright. I let myself feel it. I stopped turning away from pain and instead greeted it as a companion, a reminder of all I had risked for the sake of a better life. The more I made peace with loneliness, the less it frightened me. Spring arrived with a flourish, and I joined Margaret for a weekend in Oregon. We walked the coast in sweaters and rain boots, the air brisk and clean, salt stinging our cheeks. We talked for hours, not about the past, but about the future, travel plans, new hobbies, the possibility of falling in love with life all over again. Margaret squeezed my hand, her eyes bright. You're not alone, Linda. You never were. You just needed space to remember how much you matter. On the last night, I stood on the porch of her cottage, watching the sun sink behind the pines, and felt the past gently loosen its hold. I thought of all the versions of myself I'd left behind, daughter, wife, mother, caretaker, and realized I was finally becoming someone new. Someone whole. If you've ever found the courage to open your heart to the world again, even after it's been broken, you know what I felt then, not just hope, but gratitude. I was still here. I was still growing. And I was finally free to choose what came next. The days and weeks after my trip to Oregon unfolded like a new chapter, one I was writing for myself, sentence by sentence, choice by choice. I returned home with sand still in my shoes and laughter echoing in my ears. Margaret's words stayed with me as I moved through my days. You matter. You are not alone. I found myself believing it a little more with every sunrise. Routine became a comfort. Mornings began with tea by the window, watching goldfinches flit through the sycamores. I volunteered at the local library, shelving books and reading to small children, their open faces full of curiosity and joy. Each interaction was a reminder that I could still nurture, still connect, still bring light to someone else's world, without losing myself in the process. Alice and I deepened our friendship. We explored flea markets, swapping stories over coffee and cinnamon rolls. She encouraged me to try new things, a painting class at the rec center, line dancing at a nearby church. I surprised myself by saying yes, stumbling through steps and strokes, but laughing anyway. I felt years younger, lighter, less afraid. One Friday evening, Ben called. His voice was tentative, older somehow. Mom, can we meet for coffee? My heart raced with nerves and hope. We met at a cafe halfway between our homes. Ben looked tired, thinner, but there was a new humility in his eyes. He fidgeted with his cup before speaking. I want to apologize in person, he said. I was selfish. I let things get out of hand with Emily. I didn't defend you when I should have. I listened quietly, letting his words settle. We all make mistakes, Ben, I replied, my voice steady. What matters is what we do with them. He nodded, wiping his eyes. Emily's changing, too. She started talking about her own mother, about old wounds she never faced. We're both growing up, I guess. For the first time in years, I saw my son not as the boy I'd lost, but as a man trying to do better. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. We talked for hours, about childhood memories, about my new friends and his struggles, about the kind of relationship we could build from here. I made it clear, would never again sacrifice myself just to keep the peace. Ben understood, maybe more than he ever had before. When we hugged goodbye, it was a promise. We would try, this time with open eyes and honest hearts. Back home that night, I felt a quiet joy. I realized forgiveness didn't mean erasing the past, but allowing space for the future. I didn't need to go back to the life I'd left behind. I could love my son, care about Emily, and still hold on to the boundaries I'd fought so hard to build. With every choice, every new connection, I felt my world expanding. I joined Shirley's book club and found myself laughing late into the evening with women who had stories as wild and winding as my own. I planted a small herb garden on my balcony, sharing clippings with neighbors and watching the green shoots reach for sunlight, just like I was. On weekends, I drove out to the coast, sometimes alone, sometimes with Alice or a new friend. We picnicked by the water, talked about dreams and regrets, and let the wind carry our words out to sea. I learned to love solitude, not as loneliness, but as the freedom to simply be. If you've ever rebuilt a family, not from blood but from kindness and choice, you know how much sweeter it tastes. My life was no longer defined by what I'd lost, but by what I was still brave enough to discover. As summer faded into fall, I found myself settling into a rhythm I never could have imagined during those lonely nights in my old house. There were moments when sadness still crept in, an unexpected memory triggered by a familiar scent, a photograph tucked away in a drawer, the sound of a mother and son laughing together at the farmer's market. But the sorrow was softer now, edged with gratitude instead of regret. One Saturday, I hosted my first real dinner party in the apartment. Alice came early to help set the table, Margaret called in on video from Oregon, and Shirley arrived with a homemade pie. My new neighbors drifted in with wine and laughter, and soon the little space was alive with voices and warmth. I looked around at the faces, some old, some new, and felt something click into place inside me. I had built a family, one chosen not out of obligation but out of shared kindness, curiosity, and respect. That night, after everyone left, I lingered over the dishes in the quiet kitchen. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the heartbreak, the anger, the terrifying leap into the unknown. I remembered the woman who had once made herself small to fit inside other people's lives, and I knew I would never be her again. I was whole. I was free. I was loved, not because I sacrificed everything for others, but because I had learned to love myself. Ben and I spoke regularly now, each conversation a little more open than the last. Emily joined our calls occasionally, her voice softer, less guarded. We weren't the same family we had been, but in many ways, we were better, more honest, more human, no longer afraid to admit our faults. Forgiveness didn't erase the past, but it let us build something new, brick by brick. One golden afternoon, as leaves drifted past my window, Ben surprised me with a visit. He brought a bouquet of my favorite roses and hugged me tight at the door. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said. "You taught me more than I realized, about courage, about starting over, about what it means to really live." Tears stung my eyes, but they were happy ones. I knew then, deep in my bones, that letting go had made room for something richer than any comfort I could have clung to in the old life. I stood on my balcony that evening, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. My heart was light, open, filled with a gratitude I could hardly put into words. I whispered a silent thank you to every version of myself that had survived, and to the new ones that would still be born. If you've listened this far, if you've ever found yourself pushed aside or made small by people who were supposed to love you, I hope you know this: your story isn't over. You are not invisible. You matter, more than you know. And if you found comfort or hope in my journey, please share this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories of resilience and healing. Your voice could be the lifeline someone else needs. Thank you for walking with me. Here's to all of us, starting again, and again, and again.